Welcome to Show Studio. It's Milan Fashion Week and we're going to be talking about Prada, which up until like a few seasons ago was kind of the only show that I really looked forward to in Milan. It was the only one that I really wanted to talk about. Now it's quite interesting because now we have Gucci. Prada is somehow less exciting because I'm already really excited by Milan. But there's lots of exciting topics that we can discuss that relate to Prada. We're going to unpick the relationship between fashion and art, obviously, because very recently Prada opened a new space for their Prada Foundation. Amazing. They're an amazing institution which supports contemporary art. We'll also talk a bit about taste and vulgarity and fashion film. So lots of exciting topics. And I have lots of exciting people here to help me dive into all these things who are very much experts in some of those fields and have a bit of a Prada insight as well, which is great. But before we jump in, I'll let you guys just introduce yourselves, starting with you, Katie.
Hello. I don't know why I'm saying that.
Hi.
To go to Centre. I'm Katie Barron. I'm a journalist and an author, and I head up the retail division of trends and insights agency Stylist.com.
Hello, I'm Nathalie Khan. I teach fashion history and theory at Central St Martin's and London College of Fashion.
Hello, I'm Hettie Judah. I am a writer and journalist, and I specialise in fashion, art and design.
Hello, I'm Bertie Brandes. I co-run a magazine called Mushpit and I'm a journalist.
What was that look?
Thought people might like that.
Katie definitely started the hello thing.
I know.
It's like it was just sort of weird blue seal thing at the end, like a sign
This
on.
started quite badly because I was laughing when it began as well. So.
It's a scandal.
Professional it up quick.
I know, sorry, how embarrassing. Okay,
We're spiraling.
so let's talk. I want to start by talking about the relationship between fashion and art, and I'm not just doing this to be horrible, but that is kind of your forte, Hettie. So tell me, because I'm really interested with how a brand like Prada work within the art market, because it's not so much that they kind of collaborate with artists, it's more like they support them quite naturally and organically. It's not so much about kind of mixing art with fashion, it's kind of treating them quite distinctly, which is something the Foundation's always done. And obviously the Foundation's been around for a number of years. I think it was 1995 when it started, but has been kind of getting a new wave of press recently because of that new space. What's your take on how Prada work within the art world?
I mean, I think it's obviously a passion, and I think when I've spoken to other curators working in Milan, who, for example, Massimiliano Gioni, who works with the Fondazione Trussardi, the Trussardi Foundation. We used to talk about Louis Vuitton Foundation, so I should stop pronouncing things as if they're French. He talks quite eloquently about the fact that there, until recently, haven't been good spaces for contemporary art in Milan, despite the fact that it's an Italian city with an incredible heritage of radical art movements in the 20th century. And so that people like organisations like Prada have really performed quite a necessary function in the city. They're really creating necessary public sites for contemporary art. So I think that it was motivated partly by love and partly by a genuine desire to create a space for people to be, to experience art in their city. So I don't think it's necessarily something that's motivated by any kind of publicity. What becomes quite interesting then is when you look at when they brought Rem Koolhaas's Office for Modern Architecture on board, which was some point in the 90s. I can't remember exactly the date. I should know that. I think it might have been 1999.
It's 15 years now.
The 1999?
Yeah.
And they did this survey for them, which was actually to do with looking at retail spaces and how their retail spaces might evolve. And they created this thing that was to do with what is luxury, and luxury being ugliness and luxury being space, and really integrating the interest that Miuccia naturally had in visual art with the idea of retail space, with the idea of event, with the idea of creating things that were very much on the offbeat, on the kind of uglier side of beauty. And so, in fact, while the art pre-existed, or predated that, while the Foundation predated that, it then very much became integrated into the larger kind of Prada vision.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was just obviously on the retail kind of side of this, and also funnily enough I interviewed Astrid Welter in the summer about the project as well. And I think what's really interesting about this is actually they're very consciously keeping the kind of commercialism out of the space. Actually, we're never going to see a fashion show in there. It's never going to be unlike some of the other spaces, like the big Vuitton spaces, where they're kind of multi-purpose hybrid spaces. It's all about specifically a place which is for that passion, which is about this, this art that they are funding, or in the same way that other, it's almost, there are institutions, whether it's in the sort of the church or sort of huge commercial institutions, have always kind of helped to fund these things, but they're deliberately, you're not going to get kind of huge bookshops or see the fashion in there. And the Ren Koolhaas thing, because I was really interested in that as well, because I kind of said, okay, so she said, it's very, very specifically a separate entity. I said, but of course, yes, you do have this integration with the people that are kind of fundamental to your retail strategy. But of course, yeah, it's because obviously his perspective on this is much broader, and it's much more about how you get people to kind of engage with art that wouldn't necessarily be part of that elite. Because I think bizarrely, Prada will always be seen as being it's a very elitist brand, but this part of this, I think, is to actually bring them closer to that kind of, it's an international crowd, but that Milanese crowd particularly, because what they've designed is what Rem calls the sort of repertoire of spaces. So even the way you navigate through these spaces is very much to do with, you could go in and have, 10 different experiences, go 10 different days. And that's really important because, from a retail perspective, tying it back to that, we're very much in an era where we're kind of governed by algorithms and predictive analytics and things kind of dictating to us how we navigate. So to have a space which is very freeing is very important. So I think, it's very much allowing people to have a space to kind of lean into the things that they want to lean into. So it kind of works on a lot of really interesting levels, and it was quite pleasing to sort of talk about this division between it not just being a space that's basically to kind of house more of the commercial, fashion brand stuff. It's Prada, and then it's the Prada fashion stuff separately, but I'm going on about it now. But.
No, that's interesting. I think it's particularly interesting when you think about the way that other brands work in their sort of relationship with contemporary art. And I think it's really interesting that you mentioned, or art in general, it's interesting how you mentioned the church there, and you think of like patronage, and you think of the way some fashion brands work, and I think it's less free perhaps than Prada, where they demand more in return for their support of certain
But
artists.
isn't it also interesting to think of this idea of patronage, which I think, it's a big deal at a time when we experience cuts and public art is shrinking all the time, public spaces are disappearing. And I think to look at sort of how big, powerful brands, Prada is a, 10 billion empire, how what kind of role they play and what kind of responsibility they play in supporting art and artists. I agree with what you're saying, and I think the comparison that you made, Kate, I think is also really interesting with Frank Gehry and Louis Vuitton, and that museum makes a very, very different statement. And there I think I can see, this is a museum that ultimately is there to enhance the brand and maybe to sell handbags because of, that film that was produced at the time, Frank Gehry designing a handbag at the same time as the building.
It's all tied into the commercial enterprise with some of those things, whereas with Prada it's deliberately trying to separate it, which I think in a way gives them more cachet, will be actually the sort of the aside
it's
to
a
that.
very smart move. I agree. It's certainly, the cachet is a big
But
part.
I think the motivations of it are genuinely quite pure with it, which is what kind of makes it quite special. Because there are a lot of brands where you think, well, obviously, the more and more, you can't just carry on creating products. You need to kind of create some kind of status. And doing it with, culture is obviously a key way to do it. So, but it can get very gun for hire. I think with a lot of those brands, that it's a bit like, well, of course, if you've got more money than any other commercial brand in the world, you can pretty much buy anyone. But it's when you start to see those artists almost having to prostitute themselves a little bit that you start to think that's not really the purpose of art. The purpose of art, well, for me personally, should be to stand alone, not necessarily. I find it a bit uncomfortable at times. But
what's your take on it, Hettie? Do you think what does the art world think of these kind of fashion like displays and the fashion world's relationship?
I mean, I think it's case by case. As has been quite clear from what we've all been saying. It very much depends on the foundation. It depends on the brand. I think the kind of collaborations. I think there's an enormous amount of suspicion. There's obviously there are two industries that move at a completely different speed, and they have quite antithetical priorities. So art's about something that's going to continue on forever, whereas fashion's about what comes in the next season or half season. And I think that if you're an artist, whenever I've interviewed artists about collaborating with fashion brands, just the speed at which things happen is something they can't really cope with. I mean, even when, you know, Raph and Sterling Ruby did that collaboration, you know, it was a bit of a shocker that something's getting turned around so fast. You know, as an artist, I think even just have a show a year is quite a large...
You do hear horror stories as well of artists that have gone to work with designers and then been like completely exploited or really just felt like it didn't represent their work, and you can see how you'd be really concerned about that.
Yeah, because at the beginning you probably think, well, this is great because, you know, there's nothing wrong with a bit of patronage, and actually, you know, you have to grab that where you are, you know, wherever you can as an artist. But then I'm sure once they get sucked into a sort of big corporate bubble, it becomes a quite different beast once they're in there, and that must be quite difficult.
I think it's interesting when it's removed from the context of just putting a kind of a print or a painting on a t-shirt or a handbag. I think certain fashion art hookups work really well, like we were talking about them in the office earlier, but I love what Studio Voltaire do when they kind of, you know, bring together fashion and art, but it's kind of removed from that cycle and that context of like it being shown and then sold and then thrown away. It feels like it has much more longevity, which is interesting. And I think it's interesting to see, you know, certain young designers collaborate with their peers in a sense. You know, when they're working with artists who are around them on things like film or an installation, that's quite interesting. So that kind of cross-collaborative relationship is quite interesting. But it's very different to a big brand going, can we have one of your paintings to put on a handbag, and then that kind of murky.
I mean, you know, the Alexander Lewis show that I went to the other day, basically I think every other collection he works together with a female artist, and, you know, they work up a palette together, and he does stuff that's not derivative of the work, but, you know, so this time he worked with an artist called Flavia Audi who works in glass, and he did, you know, prints that were based on photographs through her glass work, or things that were to do with the texture, like a brass rubbing, or not a glass rubbing, taken from the outside of the texture of one of the pieces. So there are different ways of doing it that aren't necessarily exploitative.
You almost feel like the ideal way to do it is do it in a way that genuinely allows people to kind of stay in their own realms and kind of be who they are, and not kind of get to a place within commercial enterprise when you have to get to compromise. It's almost like if you can keep compromise out in a way, that's the best way to get to the end compromise, if you see what I mean. I mean, I think it's interesting, certainly in kind of the retail space as well, because it used to be very much, I mean, you know, when the Vuitton store opened, which I think was 2010, it's pretty much just a kind of museum housing their kind of glorious pantheon of art, which is great. But actually I felt in that store it almost made it just feel kind of more elitist, more distant, more alienating, which I know is half the point with a lot of those brands. You know, it's not there to be easily accessible in the same way that they don't have prices on their website. You know, they make it quite awkward because there has to be that sort of gap. But then with, you know, stores like the Celine store, it's actually, you know, using an artist to create, you know, the door fittings and the handles and things that are actually much more subtle and that are really kind of embedded into the fabric of the store, so that it becomes this kind of, you know, a sort of cathedral of the brand in a way, and it becomes this sort of permanent fixture. And I think that's a bit more interesting than just throwing an installation in and kind of saying, look, we've got credibility.
Simone Roche has done it nicely in her new store. I've talked about this loads on the panel, so I'm like PRing Simone, but she's got a lot of the pieces that inspire the collection alongside specially kind of created little installations.
That's really clever.
It's really nice because then it becomes a bit like a world in a sense, like you always want to go there and just kind of like have a look around and see it. And I think young designers need to do that she needs to give people a reason to go and see that store. It's not...
Yeah, and that's exactly that same thing of you don't want it to seem too elitist for people, especially for Simone, because her whole reputation is about being that, it's not accessible, definitely not accessible, but kind of like involving and like feminist and aimed at all women of all ages, which is why it's so brilliant. And so if you then had a shop which had this really kind of scary
sterile
environment, it just wouldn't suit at all.
Yeah, because of course, you know, it does make sense in a lot of ways, because a lot of the issues that, you know, that are with art, actually some designers, well, not all designers, but, you know, Simone talking about feminism, and obviously, you know, Miuccia is a pretty political fashion designer as they go, let's face it. That, a lot of those issues, there will be some interesting overlaps that does make it much more interesting for the audience. And, you know, we're definitely in a world that we've sort of migrated from people being obsessed with just seeing behind the scenes at shows. I mean, you know, you can only see that once you've sort of seen it. But to know a little bit more about the creative process is really alluring, which is really why the Louis Vuitton Series 3 thing obviously happened, because I think, you know, Nicolas Ghesquière really realised that they needed to give someone give people a nuggets of where these collections
What do you all
came
think
from.
of that exhibition?
I was pleasantly surprised. I was expecting it to be really. Can I swear? Yeah, fucking dreadful. But I was actually really surprised. I thought it was going to be really super naff.
About what word you were going to say.
No, I thought it was going to be really super naff. And I went round slightly before it was finished. I went round on Saturday as Evelyn, the set designer. And I actually think it was beautiful. I thought, I think she's a really inspiring woman, and I thought her set designs were incredible. And I have to say I was pleasant. I mean, I wasn't so keen on things like the accessories room, which is more product led.
I thought was funny. Well, the bits that I thought I thought it was really good as well. Just to clarify, actually, I thought it was really engaging. There were little bits where I thought were a bit of a shame, where they had like the room where they'd like brought a sort of artisan over, and it was like, let's have a look at them making something. But then they had like someone, in kind of their sort of staff sales associate dress, really formal, kind of actually you try and talk to the artisan, they kind of talk for you, and it was all a bit kind of, I don't know, that felt a bit exploitative and a bit odd and a bit like, look,
human zoo.
Yeah, it was like, look, we brought over an artisan, and it's like, we can buy, it was almost like saying, we can buy anything and anyone, and here they are, and we pop them here, and I just felt a bit like, it wasn't really showing you anything particularly interesting, and putting nuts and bolts on it, I felt a bit awkward about the whole scenario, so actually that was the weakest bit for me, but they seemed to be sort of most excited about that. But there are other bits that are beautiful, that really, there's like an entire white room that's really surreal with the kind of sort of mannequin half coming out. It's beautiful, and it's kind of, there's something much more idiosyncratic about that, and much more.
But these kinds of exhibitions, to me, just seem to exist to promote the image online. I mean, again, they work great as a hashtag. They look great on social media.
Oh yeah, it's complete promotion. It's not enriching necessarily, but it's it was less tacky than I thought it was going to be.
Why do you think they did that in a space? Why not just do that throughout stores, for example? Because I think we are seeing more of the store.
I know the answer to this, because I had to ask this question on Saturday when I wrote my feature, which is, it's specifically because they don't want to have any association with purchasing, so that they want to really open it up to the young generation, and without any feeling you might buy something in the store, that it's just,
it's a weird one though, isn't it? Because are the younger generation really ever going to buy it, do you think?
Well, I guess they're hoping that they're going to get the next generation interested.
Yeah, get them hooked. Yeah, it's a risky strategy.
I find that really interesting, actually, what you're saying, because I always get, in fashion exhibitions, if I see a brand like Prada, at the V&A, for example, there was this exhibition on Italian glamour a few years ago, and I always sort of really get confused when I see current season in a museum space, because it's something that I then can immediately buy just a few streets down. And that really annoys me. And then there was also the Prada exhibition at Harrods. Again, that was within the retail
I thought
space.
that was amazing though.
It was amazing, yes.
Because you feel a bit sort of duped. It's
well,
a bit deceitful.
Yes,
like
it is.
Yeah,
in a way it is. And I think we were saying about how Prada is so subtle about promoting the brand and separating it from the way it is shown in a non-commercial space. But then...
Yeah, because
also the exhibition at the Met with Elsa Schiaparelli again was something that to me just seemed like an advertising vehicle. That whole exhibition of Impossible Conversations was just, also really trying to push current.
That was a weird fashion though. But how do you show contemporary fashion then without that kind of?
I kind of wonder if there's a way to do it where you don't just kind of lump the collection together in a way that just kind of looks attractive in the same way you merchandise in a store. You try and show it with something that's got a bit more cultural context. I mean, that's the thing that actually I really like, the V&A, the shoes, Pleasure and Pain exhibition, which I was expecting to be a bit so-so, and I actually thought it was really interesting because they kind of divide it when I'm talking about sort of sexuality and social status. They actually had things from kind of lots of different eras, actually it's still on, isn't it, together, and for me that was much more interesting because you had this sort of global insight, and there was a lot of sort of gems, things that I just wasn't aware of in that, and I think, but otherwise it's almost like just kind of glorifying what's in the shop already. There's no other kind of context. I mean, as you said, Hettie, it's not. It's really inspirational, kind of visually. It's really inspirational, not necessarily super enriching, and that's the sort of difference. When you go to a really good exhibition, I think you come away feeling educated by it and better informed, and you sort of, and that's
what you're saying about educating, I think, is that difference, isn't it? Because if we look at a fashion exhibition in a museum, we're looking at social history. We're looking at something that is past. It can't be current. That's also, I guess, the difference when we look at art in a museum context. But fashion in a museum is something, it's a document, it's something that, we learn something from, it's history.
Yeah. I tell you what I did like though, you wouldn't be able to recreate this, but on the opening night it was really weird because Nicola Gesge basically pulled in apparently pretty much every press sample, like globally, to put it on the back of someone. Not me, sadly. I felt like I was pretty much the only person in there. It's like quite awkward in a way. And so it was quite surreal because you actually had tons and tons of people striding around. I mean, obviously a lot of them were kind of models, etc. But there were a lot of other people, whether it's like artists or, whoever. And I actually kind of found it quite brilliant.
I think that's better.
A bit vulgar, but kind of brilliant because it's literally for one surreal night, going to a weird, crazy wedding thing where everyone's wandering around at this party and they're all wearing this designer's vision. And that was pretty amazing, actually. That I found really...
It's like an exhibition of people.
Effective.
Yeah.
It must have been amazing for him, actually, to see it like that.
And it looked great. It looked great. A lot of those people looked really amazing. And that's interesting because obviously when we look at these things on the catwalk and then we see them in the real world, although a lot of those people were very modelly, it was like being absorbed in it's like jumping into an advertising campaign.
I find those events so weird that, when you get to work and you open, you've got like a press release and it's like, oh, these 20 names attended a dinner for this brand.
Yeah.
And then they're all just wearing the brand. And it's like, I just think that's so weird. Imagine sitting there all wearing the same
It's quite
clothes.
amazing during Fashion Week when you go, so you're going from shows from 9 till 8 or whatever, and you'll see the same people on the front row and they're wearing a different dress every time, and I just imagine they have a car full of dresses then, and all they're doing is going there to wear the dress and be seen in the dress and then go take it off. It's kind of the least fashionable thing that you could ever do because it shows that you have absolutely no taste because you're changing your outfit 12 times in a day to whatever anyone tells you to wear.
It must have, we were talking about this on the panel, we were talking about Instagram and kind of taste makers as opposed to celebrities, and it must do something for the brand because they're obviously investing a lot of money in it, but I just fail to see what that
I feel like it's to do with agents and stuff that you just don't know about unless you're in it, because I think people will pull in favours and they'll be like, I'll give you this celeb for your magazine if this celeb can sit front row, and they'll wear the dress and blah. I think there is a bit of a world I think there is a seedy underworld where we just assume that it works for everyone, but actually I think it'll
and you'll see whole gaggles of people and you don't realise of course they've got the same publicist.
They all have the same exactly.
So you think that's weird, they're sitting next to each other and it'll be like Tiny Temper and Sienna Miller or something, and you're like, I don't know if that's true, I doubt it, but
no, but it's exactly that kind of weird Fashion Week world that people that aren't famous suddenly become famous.
I find it
for a week.
This aptly leads us to talk about vulgarity, but not in a different context. But I do want to talk, we kind of touched on it before when we were talking about art, but I'm interested in thinking about kind of, taste and Prada's approach to taste, because I think that's also something that's really relevant within the fashion and the art. We talk about ugliness quite a lot, and we have done in the past, but I think it's interesting to talk about the way that she works with things that feel new, and I think she's very good at showing things that feel very off-kilter as opposed against the rest of the season. Why is it that she always manages to kind of make us think about taste? Is that because she's not trained in design, she's not got politics background, what is it? There's very few designers that can do that make you kind of ponder.
I think maybe it's because she's sort of obsessed with tension and frictions, there's always that kind of contradiction slightly, isn't it? But I love it when you watch the videos of people afterwards at the shows and they're kind of, you'll have 10 people and they'll all have a very, very different interpretation of what happened. And quite often, if you actually get them straight after, as in not the kind of, the Tim Blanks review later on or something, everyone's quite
confused. One knows what to say, everyone's always like,
everyone's boggled by the whole thing.
Yeah, totally. I also feel like often with Prada, as you see it, and I just think, I bet she really doesn't like it, but she loves to not like it.
Well, that's why she did the golf collection. She hated golf. So
but even I went to the last show last season, and it was really pastel, sweet, sickly, and then she had these little pink sandwiches that were bright pink with salty cheese that was light pink through the middle, and you bit it and you're like, that's absolutely disgusting, but it looks like it should taste like candy floss, and there's that to it. It's so clever the way that she makes you really question whether it's nice or horrible.
Yeah.
I still don't know what I actually think about last season. I don't think I liked it that much, but I think that's on purpose.
No, definitely is. The canapes, I love that when you go in and they're always a sign of what is to come, and they always kind of discuss
it's funny, isn't it? Because like stylists that have worked with her will always sort of say that like they love it, but there's like an intellectual rigour that goes along with it. That is almost like going through the pain barrier. So I think it's probably getting to that point of where you hate it so much. That you have to hate it, you have to be sick of it, and then you love it again and you're sick of it. So it's kind of this really rigorous.
It's definitely not easy,
process.
is it?
No, it's
Which is so refreshing.
But that's it's kind of satisfying, isn't it? You don't imagine that she's sitting there kind of joyously sketching away. It's kind of nice to think that there's that effort and that questioning and the pondering that's gone over and over and over it.
But I was having to go through all of their previous catwalk shows for an essay I did on their shoes a couple of months ago. You look back at some of the collections from the 90s and they're genuinely ugly and really not like properly nasty and kind of tacky looking, and it's just like I think she pushes herself to go as far as she can go in terms of awkwardness.
Do you think that they get uglier over time?
No, some of the early they were just some of the ones in the late 90s that like
there's that
wrong.
Infamous one that's like the bad wallpaper one that's like spring summer 96 or something, which is like all that, like, which is so heavily copied all the time now. Like,
but we were looking at that Marquez Almeida show the other day, and that palette was straight out of the late 90s.
Yeah, it's like really bad brown,
tobacco, bright pink.
But that pushing is really interesting, because it's in the same way that, like, you know, if you look at like McQueen and Katie England, they would push to the kind of almost like the edge of mortality to kind of feel alive, and you almost feel a little bit like it's the same thing with Michia, that like for her to really feel like she's living or really designing or whatever you term it, she has to go to that.
But it's so different from McQueen, because what I find interesting about Prada is there's not actually that much drama. Like the show, there's a lot of politeness. You know, like the way everything is served, it's not edgy, like
it's not emotional.
But it's not, which is quite sterile, which is why do you think it's about taste? Because you kind of go in and it's very formal, like the way everything's served and the catwalk.
But I think some of it is a bit disturbing. Like, I think it's just not the kind of instant impact, because it's not the kind of boom, I get it, the sort of drama and the sort of theatrics. And so actually it's like a bit of a drip feed, it's a bit of a slower filter when you start, because obviously it's in the details. It's like, it wasn't last season, was it? It was the one before, where all of a sudden you kind of start to see that there were the sort of frayed hems and the sort of threads coming off it, and all of a sudden you think, actually maybe there's something a bit darker going on here. I think.
But I like that it's served in such a polite way. I think that's what's really kind of like makes it feel even more bit weird. Is that kind of, you know, like, it's always done as if it's the pinnacle of fashion, whereas McQueen was always a little bit subservient.
You're aware you were always going to have something ahead of you that was going to be deliberately provocative. Whereas this isn't there to kind of smash it in your face.
Like that Sweet collection that was all pastels, it was, like, it was done.
It's like being sort of challenged a bit at a dinner party by someone that's like so good at debating that they're really polite.
Where they're really nice, and they're like, no, you're wrong, and they're smiling at you, and they're telling you you're an idiot, and you're like,
What I like about it is also this idea of you can like it, you can dislike it, but I think she's challenging this idea that it's always trend, it's fashion, and I think that's the difference. I think with taste, you know, we can differ in opinions, we can convince each other, but we could never say that it's not fashion. Because she's just dictating that. So, and also the way that she's copied, the way that it trickles down with her work. It's, again, I think, you know, supports that idea. But yes, it divides people, and I think that's, you know, that's strong.
Do you think that's part of the reason? Because obviously Prada is still incredibly successful, but they have had, you know, some difficult figures recently. And do you think that is part of the reason, that lack of immediate visual impact that you get with something like Saint Laurent or Gucci, as we were talking about, where it's much easier to copy, it's much easier to understand? Is that
she doesn't do it items in the same way at all, which is, I guess, why we all love her.
But I think she does. I think Prada does a lot of it items, but I think they're just more difficult it items.
I guess what I mean is,
the
and I don't mean it in the positive necessarily way, but like you're not going to see loads of the same Prada thing on Instagram in the same way that you might see all the Vogue assistants wearing Saint Laurent platforms. It's just, it doesn't have that same.
Well, it goes back a
in a good way
to what we were talking about before. You aren't necessarily going to kind of get bloggers discussing it because in the same way, because it's a bit more challenging. Whereas you see other things where people will just go, "Oh, love that." Simple shit, you know what I mean? It's
actually, no, people really do discuss it a lot online. Actually, no, because obviously I did this essay last month or 2 months ago about the shoes, and there's a lot of, there's a lot of quite obsessive Prada people out there. I mean, one thing that I find a bit odd is one of the problems they've been having is with their retail expansion, and they now have so many stores and they're continuing to expand. And we've all been talking about taste and awkwardness and this kind of thing. And I just wonder, if you're promoting yourself as being like the weird outsider, how does that wash when you've literally got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stores everywhere? And suddenly the odd doesn't become odd anymore, the odd becomes super mainstream.
No, that's interesting. I haven't thought about it like that. I do think it's interesting though, thinking about who talks about them online. Do you not think the people that talk about them online are the kind of like weird obsessive Prada freaks?
Yeah, it's
not
a bit
like,
of a niche group.
It's not like blogger, something like Saint Laurent, or Chloe or whatever it is. Those brands that are always worn by those blogger tastemaker type weirdos on Instagram.
Yeah.
Whereas I think the Prada, it's more like the intellectual Tumblr kids who are into it.
It's more a cerebral thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think, definitely.
It must be the uniform of the art fair, though, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, there are certain collectors that always
Celine,
just wear Prada. It's true. You're completely
I think Celine
right.
stole a lot of the intellectual crowd territory, perhaps. I don't know. I wonder what
we can do both. I think that customer will probably wear both.
Yeah.
No, what's her name? Valeria. Who doesn't? She's an amazing artist. She's connected to Studio Voltaire. She's one of the big supporters. She always wears Prada.
Really, I'd love to be that person.
And she's got an identical. She's got an identical twin.
Lou,
who also always wears Prada.
That's my dream. No, it's like you always wear Gap.
Does it totally still happen?
There's time, and it's cool to be really old and only wear Prada as well.
Yeah, definitely, very true. I also want to talk about fashion film before we do this, can you explain to me your relationship with Prada? Because you used to work there.
Oh yes, but it's so long ago. I was a baby. It was child
I feel like I've
labour.
completely forgotten.
I was selling the shoes actually. So it was working at the Prada showroom and selling shoes to international key accounts. And it was very, very pressured. It was the toughest work I've ever done.
Really?
I had my gums were inflamed after a week.
Oh my God.
Because it's so controlled. You're so pressured to reach the
Really?
budgets. I cannot describe what it's like.
Oh my God.
So
I feel like this is an expose.
yes.
They're
It was
small.
a different life.
They're
and a
very
different
controlled.
company,
Yeah.
a different life.
Yeah. Are they, I suppose also, was that point where, that control, we're getting the show in a minute. Were they quite controlling about what certain retailers bought as
Absolutely,
well?
yes, it was set before. There was no real choice. We knew what they had to buy, and that was it. And they weren't allowed to leave unless they did.
So how did
you do it?
You just do it.
Wow. When you looked at me then, I felt like you were about to give me a taste of your sales.
I love that. Bertie trying to do that.
And I'd walk out, and you'd have my credit card number and all sorts of stuff.
But did you enjoy working there? No.
I learned a lot.
But does it change
I
how you
learned a
look at
lot.
the collections?
Yes, I guess things might have changed. That was in its heyday as well. It was the sort of late 90s.
Yeah.
I'm sure things have changed. It's much more relaxed now.
Yeah, but is it when you look at the kind of creativity, when you hear people talk about Prada like this kind of bastion of creativity,
Business is business.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder though if that pressure ever gets on to Mutual, where that people are like, can you not just do something that's less difficult, less ugly, and then maybe.
But then some of the stuff, like I remember the one, I can't remember when it was, maybe like 2 seasons ago, and it was really dark, and they were walking around the dark sand. I did the panel for it.
Oh, it was
and there
not
were
last
those
season, the
socks
season before.
that were like
the cable knit
divided
ones,
into 3. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they really became quite ubiquitous. That's like the only time I've seen.
The hosiery is always really interesting, actually, but it's the cheap way to buy into it, relatively.
But it worked so well. I never saw it on someone and was like, oh God, they've just bought the Prada socks and the rest of the outfit sucks or whatever. Like, it looked brilliant on everyone. So I guess she does know. She's like just doing it in this really subtle, quite canny way.
Yeah, that's interesting. Let's talk about fashion film as well, just before we watch the stream. It does look like it's about to start.
Yeah, everyone's sitting
I
already.
feel like it's frozen.
I wish we could see
No,
what
it's
the...
not.
No, it's not, because you can see the occasional flash.
I wish we could see what the food was. Because someone else was talking about that, wasn't they? That the food is always the big
They
thing.
always do really, really
Do we
tiny
know
apples
about who
for it.
designed the space? Is it
It's very
Rem
similar.
Koolhaas again?
So
or-
this is exactly the same space that they had at the men's show, which it
Right.
looks very different here, but it's kind of sheets of perspex which are hanging, and then these metal round kind of like bits that are off the ceiling. But it looks much more. It's kind of much more delicate in real life, because at the men's show you could it's very much sheets of perspex hanging. It's not like...
So it's a permanent installation in the space?
Yeah, well, they often do that where they have the same set for like a couple of... For 1 or 2. But it was quite intimidating to sit under.
Yeah, I was going to say.
It felt like it was going to fall. Because
Yeah.
it really is sheets. Here it looks like it's boxes, but it's not. It's kind of these sheets that are hanging.
That's interesting in itself, isn't it? You should never really feel comfortable watching Prada.
The best one I ever went to was when they had an orchestra pit like in the middle of it, and they put some of us British press in it, and there were like 10 of us in it, and it was quite uncomfortable because we were like right in the middle of the runway, like looking up.
They didn't release the bears. Can I have another mint tea while we're watching this film?
Oh yeah, can I have a water, please? Thank you.
No, it's supposed to be uncomfortable.
Oh yeah.
Uncomfortable and awkward.
It's exactly the same runway, I think, as how they did with the men's. Yeah, it is. So it's not, for a long time it's been divided up into different rooms. They're not doing that anymore. So it's the full space.
Oh my goodness, look at that facial area. There's a lot going up from the sternum upwards.
Oh my god, those earrings are going to be everywhere.
There's neck cages as well.
I'm going to fashion myself a pair of those later.
You could do that quite easily.
Short skirts are kind of interesting. That's quite on Prada, isn't it?
The makeup's really interesting because
Yes.
I always think of Miu Miu as like a bold makeup lip, when they did the lipstick on, like the hair on the lip
so
gloss and
good.
stuff like that. But Prada, you tend to think of, it's often very messy, like messy hair and a red lip, but you don't, that kind of futuristic.
God, look at that gold,
Gold.
lip.
It's
Yeah.
almost like it's a bit sort of like subversive suburbia or something.
yeah.
Isn't it?
Well, what's weird is the men's was quite childlike. Like it was, those really short shorts and the jumpers with like the rockets on it and little bunnies, and it was quite kind of freakily boyish. Whereas this is very. It's
That with the kind of neon-y mesh. Well, is it gold mesh coming down it? It's quite a combination with the. Is it green or gold?
Thank you.
But I can't tell if that's a cape or if that's part of the jacket.
It's like separate.
Yeah, it does.
But you can split the looks, can't you? I think the skirts work really well on their own as well. And to me, I always associate Prada with skirts.
Skirts, yeah. It is that kind of that thing we were talking about between being polite and then really sick and elegant, but then also quite ugly.
Because half of it's really quite repressed,
Yeah.
isn't it?
I think the
But those
suburban
shoes
thing is
were
fine. With no heel.
It's quite sort of buttoned down, that kind of work-weary feel about it.
She treads this really clever line because after you see a certain number of fashion weeks, it's so easy for everything to look the same.
Yeah.
And it either looks like really wacky or really commercial.
Yeah.
But always with Prada, it's uncomfortable because it doesn't sit in either of those two things.
I also think it's worth saying though, just looking at this feels like a very cleverly commercial collection in terms of there's a lot of stuff. Like, there's a lot of pieces that you could break apart, and it's not so much of a definitive one statement. Like the jacket, it's a lot of kind of layered up, everything's got lots of uniforms, there's lots of kind of like knitwear in there. You could pull that all apart.
It looks like a sofa that my parents used to
I was going to say they're quite like furnishing
15,
stripes.
Yeah.
17.
But the palette's really Prada, like we were talking about that kind of
Tobacco colour.
those kind of oranges and browns. Come back to us.
And it
Prada.
almost, it can also, it has existed for such a long time now in our imagination and the way that, what we associate with the brand, that it can reference itself without actually taking references from outside. So those colours that you're talking about, Hettie, earlier, sort of that we associate with the 90s, those camel tones, the yellows, it's sort of going back in time, but still making it completely different again.
It's weird, isn't it? It's a bit suburban, it's a bit, well, not this one so much, it's a bit beatnik in parts of it, it's a bit, especially with the kind of like the improvised, the
Wasn't
jazz.
that collection that awful wallpaper one called something like, can you look up what Prada Spring Summer 96 was called?
It's
Because
that combination of those two
like
prints,
Suburban Nightmare
was it?
or something.
Yes.
She did one called Suburban Nightmare or something. If you search like Prada wallpaper collection. I also think it's interesting that last season was so Miu Miu-y and this feels so Prada-y. Like it's really like typical Prada.
Yeah.
But it's got I mean, it really is quite nasty, a lot of it, you know, obviously in a brilliant way, but, you know, the combinations of the different prints of each other are just so off in colour. I think it's much more difficult to have a real sense of what's really precisely off, and it's very easy to work out what looks okay because it looks the same as everything else, but you're always going to find it fresh with what looks exactly off, aren't you?
There's a lot of good wallpaper prints going on.
Yeah,
I really want to do an exhibition about fashion and interior, but when fashion and interior merge, because it's like, imagine if you had a house and one room was like Gucci or florals and like pretty, and then one room was like this and really like 70s and caravan-y.
But that's interesting because of Wes Anderson's trompe-l'oeil wallpaper in the Fondazione Prada, which that looked, I mean, I haven't seen it in situ, but it looked stunning.
Any luck? It's really annoying what it was called. I'll remember later and I'll tweet it.
I mean, we're undoubtedly seeing a kind of strong strand of the ugly attractive, that's for sure.
Yeah. I think it's a very commercial collection though.
Yeah.
I think just even in terms of like the shapes and the styles and the skirt lengths and stuff like that, you know, lots of little jackets, it's quite like...
It's funny, isn't it? Even when you see things that have got kind of a bit of flounce and frippery, they never feel like wholly feminine.
No.
Feminine, they always feel...
No, it's funny, I was thinking there was this kind of 20s cut, then it also referenced the abstract art of the era as well in the colours and shapes it's using. So it's kind of taking that feminine arena of the wardrobe and taking then deriving the colours from, I guess, quite a kind of masculine, macho area of the time.
And that skirt is just like, that's just a Prada skirt in my head,
Yes.
you know, that kind of like, you just think that so much.
Yeah.
You can see her wearing it, can't you?
Yeah.
That's interesting, the overcoat. I feel like the overcoat is sort of symbolic of this stuff that's below it bursting to get out, that kind of slightly strange, alien bizarreness below the suburbia.
I like these weird neck embellishment things.
Yeah.
I think that's quite cool. I'm quite intrigued by that as a concept.
But some of it's also on the garment as well, isn't it? Stuff on the upper strap.
But then if you think of Prada, one of the things that's so interesting is you do think of kind of odd embellishment. You know, I think she really championed putting back on all the, you know, glittery stones and gems, and I think she's kind of come to own that in a way, as much as you think of a lot of it as almost quite minimal and fabric based.
And embellishment in fashion is something that is so looked down upon, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's, you know, it's...
Yeah.
And she's almost taken an ironic twist on sort of how to decorate or how to... And it's not about wanting to appear beautiful or attractive, or it's about sort of questioning, you know, the role of embellishment itself.
Is that a kind of fur? Is that a short fur coat?
Presume so. Yeah, that looks like...
Not a shaved beaver we had the other season.
What song is this? I know this song. Crimea River, yeah. It is quite pessimistic in a sense, the show. Especially like last season was so like chipper and pleasing, whereas this is very...
It's quite dur, isn't it?
Yeah.
Have you seen that film, The Hours?
I like the fact that it's with the makeup, again, it's that thing about questioning, you know, what's valuable in terms of what's synthetic and what's real. Because even that goes back to the embellishment in a way. It's kind of like, well, is there anything wrong with things that are kind of synthesised, being beautiful, as well as things that are sort of natural in a sort of humanistic, natural way?
But it's also like things being luxurious purely through design rather than through fabrication. I think that's interesting, that they kind of... You often think that with Prada, where something's not particularly expensive, it's not made in an expensive way, but then you're interested in it because it is designed really well or really interestingly.
girls that like shopping like plastic bags, don't they?
Yeah, that thing feels like a really strong self-referencing as well.
Yes.
Who does the hair and makeup for Prada?
I think Pat McGrath does the makeup. I feel like she does. I don't think Sam does the hair. Can you check? Maybe it's Guido that does the hair. I'm pretty sure Pat McGrath does the makeup, but I might have made that up. She's definitely done it in the past. I don't think I am doing.
Basically, to be fair, if you don't all say that was absolutely hideous, won't it?
I think it's one of those collections where it's not as heavily themed as other ones. I think you're not, which maybe is because of it's a sign of the times in the way, in the sense that it's not going to be as daring when it's kind of difficult times in a certain sense. So I think it's harder to really like it or really dislike it. It's more about the pieces and.
But one of the bits of analysis that I read about, why their stores are having trouble is saying there's not enough product getting into them. So maybe there's just this pressure to.
Well, this does feel, in a sense, it feels a bit greatest hits here. It feels very, very much like she's referencing that. I like it a lot, but I like it more as clothes than as concept. Whereas other collections, I don't like them at all as clothes, but I really like them as concept.
But the shininess and the syntheticness, I think, is maybe the closest it comes to unifying.
Yeah.
I like the fact that you always have that sense, well I always do with Prada, that there's kind of, you see bits of the sort of 60s, 70s, 50s, but then it's also quite futuristic at the the same time.
It's like retro futurism, isn't it?
But it's referencing futurism. It's sort of a nostalgic idea of what futurism could be.
Exactly. I think you're seeing that so much at the moment. Everyone's kind of doing that, like.
It had all that kind of coat with the kind of giant paillettes on it.
Yeah.
60s.
Yeah.
But I like the fact that it's not, how when people will sort of use retro references, sometimes it's in a kind of comforting, nostalgic way, whereas with her, based on everything we've said before, it feels like in quite a disturbing way. Yeah. It's like almost pulling out some of the slightly grimmer bits of your memory.
Yeah, or things that failed or didn't do well. And
pulling them into the future, It's almost like kind of reworking your past and trying to kind of reinvent it into something else. I don't know.
It's like a uniform for housewives, really. All the skirts basically the same length.
It's like a bunch of suburban housewives all off to work in some factory together.
In like the Jetsons line.
Yeah.
But it is interesting.
Spaceships. Yeah.
The real focus on accessories, like every model had a bag, every model had jewellery.
Yes, big earrings.
Like it is very, very accessories. It's very layered as the styling. Like it is a producty collection.
Yeah.
But I guess like if you're off to work, it does make sense. I know I agree. Like it's definitely not themed as much as before, but it's not like they're shoved on. Sometimes you see that everyone would have like holding a bag as if the stylist has been like, take this as they walk onto the runway. Whereas at least with this, they all look like they're walking to their car and they're about to go to work. Yeah. And you would have a bag.
Yeah.
Or onto their, or air hostesses.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But I think also the themes of the collection, we haven't really looked at details of the bag, but from what we can see, the themes of the collection seem to be really, really strongly borne out by the bags, so the stripes and the shininess and the overlayers of different texture and that kind of thing. So
we didn't get to see what she was wearing. I'm devastated.
Do you know what I like? I like the fact that like you come away, like in my mind I'm thinking, it's probably about sort of glamorous drudgery and how it's quite difficult to be a woman at the moment, and we're just sort of crossing points about what does feminism mean and can you say you're a feminist and blah blah blah. And of course that's what I'm reading into it, and that is probably different to everybody else. But I like the fact that I come away with a sense of there being this other sort of, underbelly to this that matters.
But I feel like she's working through decades a little bit. Like, do you remember when there was all that, the Frayed stuff we were talking about before, which was very 40s? It was about kind of Weimar. It was very this idea of like struggling actors, and then last season, as much as it was kind of 60s, there was that kind of 50s Tupperware-y colours. And then this feels more like 60s, 70s, and it feels like she's kind of looking at women through different decades as well. I love the way she works with time.
And then there was a whole load of like 20s silhouettes as well.
Yeah,
in the middle with the
but then she always
dresses.
merges those decades really interestingly, I always think, like bringing things together. In the pictures, it looks more cluttered than it did on the stream.
No, I thought it was cluttered all the way through.
Did you?
Yeah.
Do you like it?
Yeah, no, I do like it. And also, there was a theatricality. I know we're mixing it, all the references now, but there was something about costume and Bauhaus as well, and this sort of constructivism. All of it's just the geometric lines, and then mixed with those I don't know, the panels and the crazy jewellery, those balls. I don't know.
There was something quite art house
that
cinema
mix
about it, wasn't it? It felt a bit like a kind of French film, where the housewife, Catherine Deneuve, goes off to work and she has a secret life. I can't think what the name of that film is.
Belle de Jour.
Yes, bit of that, but a less sexy version of that. But you know what I mean? The sort of secret double life stuff, basically, with an art house spin on it.
I don't think it'll be one that people will like as much as other ones, though. I don't think it'll get the best
shapes
reviews.
are quite difficult.
I can imagine it selling quite well because there's just so much product, there's so much stuff, but I don't think it's not going to be one that goes down in history as like that great Prada collection.
Yeah, no, it's a super wearable collection as well. So if you are in your 6-figure day job and you need a couple of new suits to wear for the office, you're well catered for. Which maybe it's just acknowledging who their audience really is, and then the bags and the shoes for the rest of us.
And I can imagine those suits in Zara very easily trickling down to the mass market.
Yeah,
it works that way too.
And no socks for us.
Good shoes socks for us.
Nice socks.
Very nice.
Good earrings.
The DIY earrings.
It's interesting. I'll probably say this, and I'll look closer, and there'll be more. But often there's a lot of dresses with the way a lot of how she's talked about gender. It relates to dressing women and men very distinctly, and last season was very hyper feminine, but even the one where it was all grey and black, like all the women were in dresses, whereas it's much more about the skirt suits. It does feel like it's much more for the working woman. There's not any kind of like party wear so much. Like there's a few pieces like number 14, but not to the same extent. It's really about it's about the skirt suit. But then actually it's interesting because I say this, but then last season all that pastels, what I found quite interesting is a lot of the shapes were quite masculine. It was little suits. So that is quite interesting. Maybe it's about, but it's a very different shape to the suit of last season. It's less cropped and sweet. It's more kind of
boxy, isn't it? Yeah.
But then for her men's, I always think of a slightly boxy jacket. You think of that shape, that kind of Prada.
Wish we could see the shoes a bit more closely.
Yeah, the shoes look really good.
Yeah, I feel like half of Milan's going to be wearing number 19 next summer.
Yeah. The colours are good though.
Yeah, I love those old sofa prints.
It's a bit sort of 70s car dealership.
Yeah.
Like the office that you go and make the deal in. It's sort of.
So are we impressed then, or what does this say about what Prada's trying to say at the moment?
Sell to its core audience.
Yeah? So you think it is about selling?
My feeling is that this is understanding exactly who buys it, and it's maybe rather than going off and doing chandelier glass covered stilettos, it's actually catering to the people that are buying it.
That is also that. Do you remember those Prada sunglasses with the curly?
Yeah, I have those.
And
everyone had them.
Hell.
You can't wear them anymore as well because they always look fake.
They look fake. B, they were ubiquitous, and that might have been quite frightening actually for them because although they will have sold an absolute bucket load, you can.
What's so scary about those is they've become such a famous shape now that when you're in the street and there's like those fake sunglasses tables and they have the fake Ray-Bans, they now have that as like a standard fake style of sunglasses.
Doing really well, isn't it? Doesn't suit Prada.
Lou, here are your dresses. The run of dresses.
There's a really pretty.
They look good there, don't they? Number 28 looks amazing.
But they're kind of quite a different type of dress to what we saw last season. It was very cocktaily, like little like sweetheart necklines. These are more kind of like working woman dress. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's working in the summer in Rome.
Yeah, it's not like
something that's really weightless.
Yeah,
and slightly stands off the body.
There's also like so little flesh on show, which is quite interesting as well, given that it is spring summer. And it's not, it's very kind of covered up. It's quite an old collection in the sense, it doesn't look like it's for a young woman, whereas last season was like so infantile.
The silhouette of those suits was really, last season for sure. Yes.
One thing I'm really kind of getting now, suddenly seeing them like that, is that actually a lot of the colourway clashes, it's making me think of beaded jewellery, like almost like Native American beaded jewellery or Mexican jewellery against a garment. So those really ferocious whites, reds, turquoises and tobacco colours. They're almost like something that's superimposed onto the rest of an outfit.
But then the colours remind me a bit of, it's a completely different collection in feeling, but you know the collection with all the faces on it, like I can't remember what season it was, I'm terrible at that. It's kind of that similar palette where it's really bright and really, really bold.
Like mural art.
Yeah, exactly, like mural. It's not muted.
But so it feels like it's added on to the, so it's almost like a piece of jewellery in itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is interesting because it means they're almost like, it's kind of like an armour in a way, going out and putting your kind of armour on.
And you were saying they're not Instagram much, well that would be pretty recognisable on a picture that big as well.
I think it's a thinker of a collection, isn't it? I want to like revisit it and muse on it.
We're in that classic spot, aren't we? Where we don't really know what we think.
But I do think that Gucci will have stolen that like obsessive, like the collection that everyone wants to go see and they're obsessed with and what they're going to do. I think the temperament of Milan has changed now and that's really interesting. The tempo is so different. Yeah. And I wonder what knock-on effect that will have on Prada, whether it'll become even more like the thinking collection and Gucci is that immediate fashion hit, or whether they kind of start to compete a little bit.
I think they're starting to compete already, don't you think?
Yeah. I just think there's more energy in Milan now.
I mean, Gucci was such a sort of stratospheric shift, wasn't it, to the... to something into that sort of slightly ugly territory in a way as well.
But Bertie, can you see somebody of your age wearing any of this collection?
I mean, yes and no. There are certain bits like that sheer overcoat. You could make that look very cool. Yeah. But I was thinking like wearing these. I don't know if it would make me feel kind of like sexy, powerful, in that way that I like clothes to do. It's definitely for functions, not parties. Don't mean that in a bad way, but I do think, for a younger audience. Also, those stripes.
But that's one of the problems I also think with brands that do collections that kind of return to the working woman, is often it's really easy to celebrate that and be like, oh, that's great, they're like treating women seriously and not like kind of women that just run around and wear cocktail dresses. But then for a younger generation, like the notion of the working woman doesn't exist, like because most kind of 20-something girls are doing internships, or they can't get jobs, or they're working from home, or they're freelancing, and most people, like, unless you're wearing a suit to work, in which case you're probably wearing a black suit, you're kind of wearing jeans or whatever you want. So I think that working woman idea isn't a reality until you get to a certain point where you are that art woman who needs something to wear to freeze.
But I think that's why I always find it difficult that she ever sits down and kind of really imagines in that commercial way, I'm designing for someone to put something out to go out and sit in their office. I always tend to think of her designing as if she's designing for a moment in time, as a comment on a moment in time more, and that issue of being a working woman and a woman in general is, so I always tend to feel it's more to do with that. I mean, obviously there are commercial issues, but that's why I'm so interested in Prada. So I don't feel it's just about that,
Well, it's about more, isn't it? It gets you thinking. Yeah. We all need to go away and have a muse and report back.
I would say to Bertie's point, there's definitely something about it being for the older woman though, always, because I think you always get that feeling that it's about someone that's kind of been through a lot more of their life, and their sense of confidence comes from a different type of power. Yeah. But actually, it's very rarely about a kind of a sexualised version of dressing, occasionally, but very rarely with Prada collections.
But that's the distinction between Prada and Miu Miu as well. I don't think they should merge. I think it's different customers, and we were saying at the beginning that it might overlap, but this this is. I think it's a good move to make this Prada again. Yeah. And I guess with the last collection there was, I don't know, maybe it was just me, there's a slight feeling that I couldn't really tell the difference between the two. And here we really have sort of Prada for that.
To see what Miu Miu's like.
Yes. I think that's a very, very good point. I think they're differentiating it much more sharply, aren't they?
I think the overlays are really good. The more I'm looking at them, and going back to what Hettie was saying, I think they're a really interesting statement, work on all kinds of levels, and I can see that being copied a lot.
But it is one of those collections where the more you look at it, the more you're going to see and the more you'll like it, which is that kind of collection will do well in store as well, I guess, because there's more to see. It's not just about that kind of conceptual statement.
I think you can kind of get fond of pieces of Prada after the event, can't you?
And there's also what I like about it too with the handbags, and we're talking about the use of accessories, it's that pride of carrying a handbag that makes a statement again, which is something that we've stopped doing because the it bag is no longer relevant in that same way that it used to be. But here there's a real sense, I'm making a statement with this bag. If it goes with what I'm wearing or not doesn't really matter, but I care about the bag.
I want one.
I think the bags are they're nice because they're fresh, but they're really easy to want as well.
Yeah.
But it's quite interesting because the way that, you know, the shape of a bag and the way you then have to carry it really determines the way you present yourself as a woman.
Totally.
And these are very much like old-fashioned frame handbags that are about that kind of working
So the
life.
kind of handbag where you have to hold it like that and you can like whack someone across the head with it.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? And you're like, get out of my way.
Like open all hours. Huge, cheeky,
And also in the fashion films that we didn't chat about earlier, it's that the use of the handbags in those films, like the Postman Dreams, I think is very clever as well. And again, everything is centered around that object, about that commodity.
But it seems like we like it. It's given lots of food for thought.
Yeah.
Should we give her a round of applause to wrap things up?
Well done, Prada.